Good morning to you, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here from Hawaii, October 29th, 2021. This is the final part in the series, A Masterclass in Creativity. This is part 11. It's a dedication to my beloved, dear best friend in Burma, really, U Win Tain, who was sentenced to life in prison today at 80 years old for high treason. He had spent over 20 years already in prison. And I learned of this information just a little while ago. To say that it's heartbreaking is not really accurate. It's a type of smothering, and equally a fiery vigilance, if you will, in response. And so I'd like to spend this final talk talking about, in my humble way, the mind and heart of a true freedom fighter. It's really not easy to get out of one's mind a tragedy and the trauma of that tragedy. We know it, we all know it. U Win Tain is truly a brother, the embodiment of intimate brotherhood on lots of levels. We're relatives in Dhamma. Many of you know that Burma is not only my spiritual home, where I had been blessed to be a Buddhist monk for a period of time, but equally a country, sadly, tragically, that has undergone, I want to say repeated, but more like unremitting tyranny for a long, long time, both by the British for 135 years in their imperialism and genocidal oppression of the people from 1835 until 1943, approximately, World War II, and then a succession of military dictatorships, which sound mild when you hear the word dictatorship. And of course, it becomes somewhat more severe when you hear the word military dictatorship. But Burma had a succession of dictators that were particularly tyrannical, who lived in a fetish for power, a lust for power, an unremitting, building lust for power. We know them around the world. The uber wealthy, the politicians by and large driven by a lust for wealth, power, and privilege. We have China's Xi Jinping, and has somewhat successfully made Burma a province of mainland China. It's adjacent to southern China. It's smaller than half of the provinces in China, and it borders the Bay of Bengal. It's deep in oil and gas and resources, and from the Chinese point of view and from dictatorial perspectives, human beings are seen as livestock, and so it has a high regard for slavery. Garments, plastics, cars, extractions from the earth, whatever is needed for the human to be relegated to that of a human livestock, to slave at truly intolerable, impossible to survive so-called wages. I've seen thousands of these people. I've interviewed hundreds. I've been in these factories. I've been in these areas. I've gone to these disposed of areas of the country called villages, but they're really just areas of deep impoverishment based upon the oppression of dictatorial regimes. And I know many of us have been talking over the months now, especially during this so-called pandemic, and the increased conflation between public health and the rise of the totalitarian gene, the rise of the authoritarian psychology, the rise of dictatorial energies within a democracy. And we're seeing it with the tyranny that started with do this or else, punitive behaviors. And I want to start right here in the beginning of this final talk today, because this is my final talk for some time to come, probably a week or two, I'm not sure exactly. I've got some creative things that I want to do, but this will be the final talk in this series, and I'll be taking a bit of and it's not a break, but just a hiatus from the day-to-day live stream and podcast as I do here on Facebook, on YouTube, and SoundCloud. So thank you for tuning into that. But back to the mind and heart of a true freedom fighter, U Win Taine, 80 years old, who spent 20 years incarcerated in various prisons around Burma. He is as intimate as family can be. He's a brother. I know most of his family. I won't say that much more about those relationships. I know his colleagues. He is the principal advisor to the incarcerated state councilor and Nobel Peace Laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, also facing life imprisonment. But U Win Taine yesterday is the patron politician of the National League for Democracy, the political party of the people, and that which was founded by Aung San Suu Kyi, U Chi Maung, U Win Tin, and others, including a younger U Win Taine at that time, who resigned as a military captain, who's actually more senior than the dictator in Burma today, the terrorist Ming Online. Is the embodiment, if you will, for me, among others in that country, the embodiment of the qualities or the attributes of a true Dhamma-rooted, multi-faith radiant, revolutionary, non-violent, sensible, intelligent, humorous, satirical, witty, resilient, hope in action driven consciousness to excavate in one's own mind residual states of fear, greed, shame, blame, hate, violence, and those more deeply corrosive states of mind that are very difficult to see, that when colluded with within one's own psyche lead to the denigration of self and other. In other words, U Win Taine, and I speak to him right now, incarcerated in an undisclosed prison cell in Burma, in a wheelchair, needing numerous medications, which I'm sure have been denied of him. After 20 years plus already in Burma's gulags, tortured, interrogated, violating his family. And yet within it, it's impossible from the outside to even begin to stand at the ankles of these true freedom fighters who have put not only skin in the game, put their entire body in the game, their entire mind and conscience in the game of revolution as vocation of being. And U Win Tain's incarceration to me is, it's interesting that I had posted his incarceration yesterday on Instagram and Facebook, and just this morning how the tribunal, the Orwellian tribunal run by the terrorist Ming Online, disposed of him instantly in the first illegal sentencing of an elected civilian figure in Burma. 20 years at 80 years old. The average lifespan, 76? He is sure to pass on in his glory of conscience. I want to get into this in a minute. Yes, for me on the outside and those family members and those in the world, it's always harsh to hear of intimacies such as a brother like U Win Tain is to me. And I can only imagine his family in their pain, and colleagues, and fellow and sister freedom fighters around the world and in Burma, that a gentleman at this stage of life, a true, eloquent, elegant, emotionally awake, spiritually dynamic, meditating, cognizant of democracy and human rights and politics, and a radical savant of reconciliation. The stories and the experiences, the interviews I've had with this gentleman and his colleagues, which anoint my books with my colleague and co-author Fergus Harlow in what's titled Burma's Voices of Freedom. He plays a prominent role, I think, in volume 2, 5 or 6 feature-length interviews. And I have videos of our interviews too, which if there was an editor, I'd like to get them out to the world to see this man of conscience in dynamic action, what it looks like. I'm an apprentice of visual experience. Watching him, listening to him, watching them behave. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi arranged an opportunity for me back in 2012 after I was unblacklisted by the dictator. And I returned to the country based upon her suggestion to do what I could in my own humble way as an outsider to bring voice to the people. And I did. And it resulted in these books, Burma's Voices of Freedom, based upon the lies and the misinformation and the global media, book contracts, the film contracts, the producers, the directors. They walked on because of the perceived falling of grace of Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, which is a complete lie, a complete act of continuous misinformation that, just like the New York Times and CNN Today and BBC and lots of corporate media around the world have gotten the entire pandemic so wrong, totally wrong, to the point where they're propagating like running corporate dogs of misinformation. You know, the lesson in this, cancellation culture is alive and real. We know that. Look at Bobby Kennedy Jr. Look at Dr. Robert Malone and Dr. Ryan Cole and the radical savant out of China who escaped, fled China, purposefully left everything behind when family and husband, relatives are being disappeared and threatened, to reveal the origins of COVID, the virus funded by a gain and function process to increase lethality, to supposedly find new vaccines done underground secretly by Dr. Anthony Sociopathic Fauci with the Wuhan laboratory. of virology in China, and Dr. Francis Collins, his boss, who's resigned knowingly because they're being exposed for the sociopathic liars that they are. That collusion, that misinformation, that cover-up. The same thing with Aung San Suu Kyi. The vilification of a great mind, and yet again, a great woman. And there's something so vile about all this, right? Welcome to samsara, my Dharma teachers would say. Welcome to the lack of insight into the nature of consciousness. Good and evil are just expressions of consciousness. And that's why you entered the arena of Dhamma, which was to enter the arena of interiority and to study the machinations of consciousness, the facets of consciousness as they express themselves knowingly and through habit patterns, through your own mind. And if you believe that, you fuse with those streams of evil or ignorance or totalitarianism or greed or power, you become the dictator. You become the Fauci. You become the Ming Online. You become the Hitler. You become the Xi Jinping. You become the Joseph Biden, a dictator clothed in a democratic uniform of deceit. It happens. It's happening. And here it is to a family member. Aung San Suu Kyi's a sister, a mentor, an ally. We're all students of the same Dhamma, the same teachers. And to me, Burma was my birthplace for Dhamma, the birthplace for mindfulness, the birthplace for seeing Dana. Dana, the virtue of giving unconditionally without any desire for anything in return. And not just the absence of conditions in generosity, but the beautification of the gift to alleviate any sense of conditioned expectation that there's an accounting going on. These people go out of their way to support the eloquence of giving, the eloquence of ethical courage in dynamic action. U Win Tain, Aung San Suu Kyi, other friends and mentors. These are my intimates. This is a deep blow at a core level, but it really, really, especially today on the eve of a very important movement, it's emboldening something deep in me. I've got a film project that isn't just about entertainment. It's really an expression of cinematic musicality, spoken word revolution. Revolution addressing the core issue, not blaming Xi Jinping in China and Anthony Fauci alone and all the running dogs in Silicon Valley and all the various ways of collusion and complicity to denigrate out of this lust for power. The study of the machinations of global consciousness, the collective consciousness. We need more insight into this great morass called the whole, and not to just jump to conclusions of running from individuality to oneness. There's a lot of room in between. It's called oppression and tyranny all over our precious planet. Where's our activism? Where's our mindful rebellion to tyranny? The lesson for me in this, so many. Read the words of these true freedom fighters. Get our books, Burma's Voices of Freedom. Give them to the United Nations. Give them to Joseph Biden. Give them to every member of Congress and the Senate. The cancellation culture is alive and strong. But guess what? It's coming to America. The tyranny that's happened in Burma in a short period of time. It went from a relative level of an emerging infant democracy that the corporate media, you New York Times, you CNN, you Washington Post, you BBC, and all the other corporate Mongols around the world desecrated, denigrated, and shamed Burma and Aung San Suu Kyi because they didn't uphold your lie. And you supported, indirectly or knowingly, China's quest to dominate oil, gem, human slavery rich Myanmar. And you made Burma into the next Tibet, a province just like those provinces in China, Tibet is a province of China. Burma is a province of China, owned by the proxy dictatorial, sick totalitarian government in Burma, run by the terrorist organization MASAC, Ming Online, MAH, SAC, State Administration Council, controlled by Xi Jinping in China. Guns by Xi Jinping in China. Loot and money by Xi Jinping in China, by Putin in Russia. Evil. Our president talks about upholding human rights. Where, when, and when. Where, when, and how. If there isn't a greater example of radical need to exact upon protecting people from the tyranny of ethnic cleansing, a statute in the United Nations Declaration and Protocol of Intervention, Burma is the classic, epic example of a pre-Hitler-like circumstance where the United Nations, the Security Council, governments of democracies should intervene right now. How many more persecutions, death? If we don't act sooner, the next thing you know, from cancellation to a more rigorous tyranny, criminal persecution, domestic terrorist for school moms? What are you thinking? The next thing you know, persecution, incarceration without even representation, like with U Win-taen, or a trial. The next thing you know, locked away and forgotten, and we become more and more consumed with our own petty needs and hopes and dreams and protections of security and money and food chain and all the various ways in which we share and view and like in emoticon this and that in the distraction of a social media stream. When the house is truly burning with climate collapse, food chain collapse, methane releases on the poles, nuclear war, the Chicago Doomsday Clock, originated post-World War II by Nobel laureates and scientists, has been turned up to a minute before midnight, the closest it's been to Armageddon ever in the history of human life. And yet, how many extinctions have there been before the one we're in? The same dialogue, the same you, the same me, the same technology. Who's to say that evolution is not just repeating itself? How many times do we have to enter the arena of pointing out the obvious? Tyranny everywhere is tyranny here. Tyranny here is tyranny everywhere, until we all embody the revolutionary within democracy. We'll be engulfed by those who pretend to be leaders of freedom, but really are in collusion with totalitarian regimes and governments. And I do believe my own very government, many of the leaders in our country are completely sold out to China, Xi Jinping, and profit and the lust for power. Welcome to totalitarianism incorporated. Cancel culture today, incarceration tomorrow, torture though on the weekend, disappearance in the next month, the desecration of citizens and jobs and freedoms. Welcome aboard to what's happening in Burma. Under the cloud of this tyranny, Ming Online has gotten away, it looks like, with unthinkable evil, because he looks at America, he looks at the EU, he looks at Australia, he looks to China and Russia, and he says, you know, this is about as good a time as I can act. So what that ASEAN didn't invite me to the regional meeting? They'll get over it soon, especially when there's more and more money that floods into the elite. Money, the opium, the crack cocaine, the fentanyl, whatever you want to do to excite the lust in the consciousness of people. Money, power, privilege. For them, their families, their cronies. There's something about that type of toxic adrenaline that comes with privilege, money, and power. I don't know where that conditioning comes from. But my friend U Win Taine will likely die behind bars, and no one will ever even remember his name. Probably very much like with Aung San Suu Kyi, with U Tin U, the president U Win Mint, thousands of other boys and girls. When I use the word boys and girls, I wonder if I could personalize it so intimately to call that girl in there in a prison in Rangoon being raped by my daughter's name because she's of the same molecule, the same blood, the same oxygen, the same earth as the girl in the prison in Rangoon. How is there a difference? What is the illusion of separation that gives me the right to live in a degree of denial and privilege when my brothers and sisters know, my family know my daughter? How intimately can you get to other so that you act in tandem to support the oppressed? Isn't that what the need of the psychedelic is? Isn't that what the need of the ayahuasca is? We need to overcome the trauma of others, not only our own. The narcissism of spirituality. I'm not going to complain or bitch or rant and scream about that. I'm going to wait for my film, but I'm going to lose it because my family is bleeding and torturing to death. How else do we get out there? Why isn't this video shared 10,000 times? Who fucking cares about a quote from Lao Tzu, Eckhart Tolle, Deepak, Oprah? Who gives a damn? These are freedom fighters who put their entire mind and body and family and the country in the firing line for freedom. These are the people that should be on the wall, not Indian saints, not even Buddha statues, not mythic figures. They have their place, but they are expressions of emotionality. These are the people who are the true heroines and heroes. U Win Taine. I hear you, brother. I recently saw him in Rangoon. We spent many a day and many a night hanging out, talking, drinking tea, interviewing him. I'm going to put up a whole collection of videos and photographs today and tomorrow, as soon as I find the time after this talk. And I go to the beach and chill a little bit and to get more clear in my own conscience, my own sense of action at this point. It's instilling in me a deeper sense of composed fire, of revolution again, of giving me Dharma value, Dharma hope. His tragedy is not going to be seen as a tragedy, but a call to action. I can't implore or encourage other people to take up action. That's your choice. You have to believe in something in this world that exceeds your own four walls, that exceeds your own so-called tribe, that exceeds your own need to heal, constantly healing. How many more vitamins do you need? How much more extracts do you need to drink? My healing. We're all going to die, for God's sake. But freedom could perish permanently. The body of democracy on this planet is undergoing the worst cancer called totalitarianism. And all of us are being called upon. Look at our country today. Those of you who know this far better than me. Look at the great minds of women and men, doctors. 12,000 doctors, I've learned, are being vilified and threatened with their licenses to uphold the health and the sanctity of life because they don't want to jump on the tyranny bandwagon of injecting mandatorily an experimental substance that's proven across the board in every country of the world. Adverse effects? That's something you put like with a Tylenol. blood clots that lead to amputation of limbs, deaths, children with brain disorders, heart clots, strokes. Hello, pause. Welcome to freedom. Welcome to democracy, right? This isn't anti-medicine. This isn't anti-science. This isn't anti-vaccines. This is conflating public health and sanity and decency and the oath of health and democracy with power, privilege, money. Are you really going to sell out humankind and decency and democracy for a few extra dollars? What in the fuck is wrong with you, Mr. Biden, Mr. Fauci? What is wrong with you, Big Pharma, you fucking idiots? Someone needs to shake your brain, open your mouth, and put a high dose of luminosity in your death mind and awaken yourself to self-respect, empathy, compassion. Burma is a country of reconciliation. U Win Taing, after his last release from incarceration, after his first release, after his first incarceration of 28 days of torturous interrogation, I met him in the parliament up in Naypyidaw. I met him and his colleagues. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, as I mentioned, organized a group event for me to be able to interview her leading colleagues in parliament. And U Win Taing was there, my beloved friend, who I've known since 1995, who was the key person to help support me in navigating the police and the military to get into Daw Aung San Suu Kyi's compound in Rangoon for 6 months of underground conversations with her, with him, with U Tin U Chi Mung, and so many others. As a result of that support, he went to prison and was radically tortured and interrogated. Never once did he ever complain. I've never heard a complaint come out of that guy's mouth. He is so wickedly gallows-driven, satirically funny, you cannot believe. And when you talk to him, he has a calm about him, a cool. Just doing what I believe is right. Just doing what I believe is right. Just doing what I believe is right. Just doing what I know is right. And not making a big chorus out of it. The dude, the guy, the gentleman, the revolutionary, the Dhamma soldier lives in the radiance of authentic humility. He wears his power invisibly, stands in great dignity. And the beauty of this mind, a true radiance of a beautiful mind, a mind radiant with not just a love of freedom. Let's just pause there for a minute, if I can. Perhaps for me, and maybe you, how can I take today this information, our life, our circumstances, more deeply into my heart? I don't want to hear some meditation on calming the mind. I want to take a guided meditation that's unique to you. Talk to yourself on your audio video recorder. Talk to yourself. How can I enter my own conscience in a more full manner to excite my own personal revolution, to feel more the importance that my freedom is inseparable from other, and other becomes wife, husband, sister, brother, daughter, mother, goddess, lover, me, you. That's U Win Taing. How do we take in the courage to be larger in dignity, in conscience, and the expression of radical democracy in action, to confront injustice, to point out the flaws of another person's unrecognized delusion, to point out the efficacy of freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, freedom of sovereignty over one's body, the right to consent, the right to freedom of what I put into my mind, what I put into my body. Welcome to democracy. Welcome to America, the America that I love and know. And I want to be anti-tyranny, anti. Become anti to anyone tells you to do something that you don't want to do. Ask, why should I do that? By what right do you have to tell me to do that? What is the wisdom of what you tell me to do that I shouldn't do? Why aren't you doing that? I want to be sovereign over my mind, my family, and my body. Thank you very much, Mr. Tyrant. And U Win Taine will live in sovereignty in a prison cell, likely never heard from again. His family, his wife, no one will ever have visitation rights. No one will ever write an article about him. And yet, a human life dedicated from a young age, abandoning the military, more senior than the dictator himself, to walk on, leave the military uniform, and to stand in the ragged, elegant dress of a true activist, a true freedom fighter, a revolutionary born of conscience and of the spirit. And this is why I fight so hard for my own humble, distant way, for the people of Burma. It's my Dhamma home. It's my home where I've learned more and more slowly. I'm a slow learner, but I'm very determined. The power of activism and rebellion and revolution and believing in the deeper elements of your own decency and having the courage to learn the power of action, putting your thought in action, putting your voice in action is what I've learned from Daw Aung San Suu Kyi. Putting your mind in action, I've learned from U Win Tin and U Tin U and U Win Taine. Put your mind in radiant action. Speak up in the way in which you would like to be spoken up for. Embody other as sister, wife, brother, and daughter. Isn't that rad? We must learn practices to excavate my own sense of identity and begin to enter the mind of other in such a way that we not only feel, but we feel in such a way that we would want to act as if it was the other person's need. What would U Win Taine want us to do right now? Speak up. Use our agency in every way that's relative and humble and real to you. Revolution doesn't just mean, obviously, standing in arm at the front lines of confronting Xi Jinping like the boys and girls in Hong Kong did who've been disappeared. Be a force multiplier. Share this video. Turn your friends from healing into revolutionaries. Talk about things that are inconvenient truths, not comfortable things. Overcome the need to talk about the problems and talk about the ways to become more active in society, in community. How can we point out the flaws of this mandate, the tyranny? How can we stand up for democracy? I was thinking about my beloved friend Minya, a Bosnian Muslim from Sarajevo. Her father was an English professor at Sarajevo University. She's now a PhD doctor in Brisbane, where she was brought into Australia as a refugee as a young woman. But she learned English sufficiently enough to be the chief translator for the general of the British peacekeeping forces at Dayton in the peace accords. And she talked to me at length when I met her, and we hung out a lot in Brisbane, about what it was like to live in Bosnia, this affluent, beautiful country. The Winter Olympics, what was it, in 1984, 85, or 86, were in Sarajevo. Hey guys and girls, we got blue eyes too. Bosnia may not be known, Croatia may not be known, Bosnia-Herzegovina may not be known, but hey, we play the piano, we're concert pianists and violinists and cellos, we do sculpture, we make love, we masturbate, we do cinema, hey guys and girls, we are alive, sophisticated people. And guess what? Some of the most intense, grotesque massacres, seizes of cultures and cities, the desecration of people, the torture, the violation that went on in Europe in the 90s, called a genocide. The siege of Sarajevo was one thing, but the genocide of Bosnia and Croatia is another, by the Bosnian Serbs. And Minya would tell me, we saw on TV as we were hanging out in our flats in Sarajevo, sipping tea and going out to a nightclub that night, something strange up in the north coming out of Belgrade, an attack of some small village by paramilitary from, what the fuck are they doing, you know? Out to a nightclub and dancing on various forms of ecstasy. 3 weeks later, Sarajevo is under siege by that little small microscopic group of men and women called paramilitary. And for 43 months, the city, once affluent, goes into the most impoverished, forgotten, dark hole on planet Earth. Snipers, starvation, the glee and torture of people, and the bloodlust of these soldiers hunting and killing and raping, starving and forgotten. Sarajevo? How do you spell that? Where is it? The lesson? If only we had paid attention earlier. Medical tyranny in America is one thing. This is not alarmist. Look at the collusion and the complicity. Hitler is one small evil prick of a consciousness. But those millions of other professors and writers and doctors and nurses and students in collusion. What is collusion? The drug of money, profit, privilege, held together by this thing called moha, or ignorance. The current of ignorance running through the collective of consciousness. Isn't that why we entered the Dhamma world? We meditate, we do psychedelics, we do psychotherapy, is to understand our collusion with ignorance individually, collectively. And to do what we can to see and study the machinations of that collusion, to elevate the good, true, and beautiful, but equally to become revolutionaries of overcoming collusion and complicity with evil. While we extricate ourselves from the mire of delusion, we must put a hand out on the riverbank of others in the torrent of tyranny and dictatorship. We must reach out to U Win Tain's family. We must reach out to Aung San Suu Kyi's family. We must reach out to all the unknown women and men in the gulags in Burma family. Who are those family? Your best friend is family. Your wife is family. How do we consecrate each other as brothers and sisters in freedom? As one species, one mind, one world, one God, one Dharma. What do we do rather than, pledging allegiance to the flag of oneness and unity, overcome the tyranny of dogmatism and tradition and orthodoxy, and live in the vulnerability of revolution, to take heed that they're going to come for us if we're not really vigilant, to learn from those who they take as family members before they take us. They came and got Minya. They came and got her family. They came and got her country and her people. They came and got her city. There are many people who now are dead, tortured, traumatized beyond even the ability to walk or speak. Why is beyond me to understand or know, except that it is. That is. It is. This existence is real. It bleeds, it hurts, it harms, and when captured by the tyranny of ignorance, we have dictatorial regimes, we have totalitarianisms, and we have dictators known as Ming Online who put my beloved brother in prison and threw away the key today. And he's going to do it with my friend Aung San Suu Kyi and all the other men and women. And guess what? He did it even when he was refused participation in his own collective political group called ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And while my president is in Glasgow trying to talk about climate change, and China, the biggest polluter in the world with more coal plants than all countries combined, basically said, fuck you, I'm not even going to come. You know why? Because he knows that Biden is in his pocket. He doesn't need to show up and talk. Medical tyranny is one thing. Political tyranny is another. Calling school boards and moms who want nothing to do with critical race theory and the incredible... We've got massive onslaught of migrants and immigrants coming across the border. I have nothing to say about that. They're living in tyranny in their other countries. But it doesn't mean that they can flood into America under the cartels and the violence and the rape and the drugs. And this is all from, what are you doing? Are these all voters for democracy in our country? And there's so many ways in which the Chicago doomsday clock of Nobel laureates and scientists have turned it up to a minute before midnight. I'm going to do a film called Extinction X-Rated meets Walking Dead and Freedom Never Dies meets Spiritually Incorrect. I want to address tyranny with a hope of activating people around the world into the beauty of a revolutionary expression that stands up today to tyranny everywhere. Every one of us in this world must learn the lesson from my friend Minya, not to glance away at the television. It's a village way up in the north. Burma's a country way over there somewhere near Thailand and China and Bangladesh and Nepal and formerly Tibet and Malaysia. Where? How do you spell it? Burma, Myanmar, are they the same country? How do you say her name? Aung San Suu Kyi. Isn't she the one that sold out the Rohingyas? Propaganda, misinformation, roll up your sleeve, get the vaccination, have your kid have blood clots, lose her cognitive functions. I'm not saying across the board, maybe there are those who will benefit from it, but enough information has been realized through VARs. So much information has been repressed. And these doctors who are speaking out about the adverse effects and saying halt are being tyrannized and threatened and violated. Our workers, our military. What are you thinking, Biden? What are you thinking, Fauci? What are you thinking, United Nations? You are overcome with the delusion of tyranny, and you're being driven by the opium toxicity, the fentanyl, the crack cocaine of bloodlust, money lust, power lust, the worst forms of addiction. It's our time to stand up. I want to close today my final talk in this series. I will return, God willing. I will return stronger. I'm not tormented. I'm just really in a state of fire and resolve And I've never been stronger, more clear and healthier, more vibrant. Yes, I feel lonely at times. I feel alone at times. I'm held in the good graces of a few really beautiful minds and supporters. Yes, there's more that I want at this stage of life. I miss the human interaction. I miss stages. I miss groups. I miss retreats. I miss being in my country of Burma. I miss traveling to cities that I've been in. I miss going back to Byron Bay and Melbourne and Bali and Burma and Rangoon and New York and Los Angeles. I miss that. I miss the human interaction. There's something beautiful for me personally in being nurtured by group space to be the most radical voice I know inside of my own humble soul, and at times driven by my own unrecognized pride, yes. But revolution is in my blood. My family is from Syria. Look at Syria, tyrannized. If my grandmother and grandfather were alive today, they would weep. They would play Nick Cave's song, The Weeping Song, over and over and over again. I play it over and over and over again, not to weep, but to empower me that weeping and crying is a valuable asset. It's an empowered state of mind to actually feel enough, to be troubled enough, to overcome complacency. This is like, I call it the luminosity of wise anxiety, the discomfort of normalcy, the willingness to emerge out of my own sense of needs, the constellation of my own personal preferences, and to hear the cry and the scream and the love and the music. U Win Taine is a musician of the soul. He is an expression of radical Dharma artistry of revolution. Read our books, Burma's Voices of Freedom. Read his interviews, what it meant to stay for 20 years in a prison cell, sometimes crammed in with 6 or 7 other men, unable to lie down except in rotation, to stand, to sleep, and to crouch for years, without magazine, without pen, without paper. Think of the fidelity to your belief systems. Belief systems have gotten a rotten deal. Somehow they've been marginalized. But belief systems become the arteries of principles. They take you way down deep into the soul of your dignity. A belief system just on the wall through a word is insignificant unless you nurture it through direct action to feel. And you go, wow, U Win Taine is a bright, shining example of courage and grace under pressure. He'd be smiling today. I've actually heard through the underground sources that he is joking with his jailers. You are the ones who are prisoners of your own denial and your own fear. What more can you do to me? Take away my wheelchair? That's U Win Taine. Under all circumstances of duress, he rises to radical satirical humor. You can't take my freedom from my mind. You can't take my identity of a revolutionary. You can't take my democracy. My blood is oxygenated by freedom. He would never say these things, but I could say it on his behalf, and it's true. U Win Taine, you will not be forgotten. You live on, my friend. And may this video, may your words, may your interviews, may your life, may your dedication to freedom and democracy shine bright in my lifetime, in the lifetime of people after our lifetime. May you be known for your courage and grace under pressure, your dedication to democracy, and your dedication to reconciliation. I want to end with this point. Burma isn't just at war. Now it is. They've left no option. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and all the elected leaders of the country, including U Win Taine, they lived and breathed what was first known as a revolution of the spirit. The next iteration of that revolution was what was called by Sayadaw U Pandita, the architect of it, their teacher, the Dharma of reconciliation. how to go down deep inside of your own inner being and resolve the tensions of blame and judgment and retribution. U Yen Tane, Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, all these people, they did not seek revenge of their so-called enemy. You could feel it in their presence as you would feel someone on a high dose of acid, whether they're telling the truth or not. Their resident cellular level of integrity rippled out love, compassion, and kindness. Yes, they bristled at times, but mostly when there were actions that harmed their people, not them. And they continued putting their heart forward. Reconciliation is more important than revenge. Discussion, the feminine-inspired power. Let's talk through our differences. Don't tyrannize me with your ignorance, prick. Where is the divine feminine, so to speak, really in politics today? You, Mr. Biden, where is your awakening to the power of listening, decency of dialogue, conversation over mandates? Listen to the facts, listen to the data, listen to science, not scientism. Overcome your prejudice through power, deception. Challenge your mask of sociopathy. We need more powerful U Yen Tanes and Daw Aung San Suu Kyis and all the other boys and girls in Burma. We need to overcome separation. Reconciliation, I'm going to take that more and more into my own heart. To resolve my own tensions, at the same time, rise up more passionately in a revolution of the spirit that speaks up while there is time, like my friend Minya, thank you, my beloved, for living and breathing freedom and resilience. What she went through, what her people went through. Dika, my friend in Los Angeles, the courage that you and your family and your people have undergone and continue to go on, knowing that truth. We have lessons to learn from the Holocaust, from the Yugoslavian genocides, from Burma, from Timor, from all the various things in the world, including Rwanda and South Africa. Let's not have America become like Burma or like China or like Tibet. It is our time to rise up collectively, boys and girls, men and women, in a high radiant expression of radical revolution in any way that you deem valuable. Express your love of freedom of thought, sovereignty of body, the power of dialogue over tyranny, and let your voices be known. From my heart to yours, thank you for being in my life. Thank you for being in my heart. And God willing, I'll see you soon, somewhere into November. And have a beautiful, beautiful day. And remember my dear friend U Yen Tane and my dear friend Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and the President U Win Myint and all the other men and women imprisoned in Burma, the whole country incarcerated. It's a genocide of democracy there, but they're fighting on. And let us everywhere in the world where you believe in freedom and democracy, stand up and confront the tyranny, the injustice. Everywhere we see it, socially, politically, medically, everywhere we see it inside, stand up. A revolution of human consciousness now, before it's too late. From my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in. God willing, see you soon.